Okay, so welcome to another Bitwig tutorial, and on this one we are going to be talking about the Polysynth. So it's a very simple, just a very simple synthesizer, but it's a little bit weird to understand. So this part is simple, but this part is confusing, and then, it gets simpler with the filters, but then we have a confusing wave shaping options. So we're going to talk about this. Of course, we are not going to spend like an hour doing this because it's a very simple, but I'm just going to give you the tools so you can start building patches and creating sounds with this. So first of all, you get two different oscillators, the number one, and then you get the number two right here. Now, of course, since you have two oscillators, you need a way to, make them ring, make them sound. So right here, this control is going to be the one that will be selecting what you're going to hear. So you get a saw and you get a square right here on the number two. So right now we get the saw. And if I start going to the other way, we get the square. Now, the cool thing is that this blend control will give you a blend of both. Of course, you're hearing both at the same time, or you just can do a little bit more from the first one and a little bit from the second one. So you start getting different waveforms. And you get different sounds, of course. All right. Okay, I'm going to go back to the number one. So first, then you got the most basic controls right here. You get the pitch, which is that you can go in semitones, and you can go 7 semitones down or 7 semitones up, right? Very simple, right? The other thing is that you can go in ranges. You can go really low, or you can go really high, right? So again, just very, very simple controls. Now then you get the shape control, and this one is a little bit weird and very particular to this synthesizer. You don't get this feature in all synthesizers because right now you just get a sawtooth. Now you just get a saw. But what if you wanted to get something else, right? So if you go all the way down, you're gonna get a square. And notice I'm using a little bit of reverb just to make the sound a little bit better. So you get a square, and if you go 50%, you get a saw. So it means that maybe if we go all the way up, you're gonna get something different, but no. We get the same saw that we were getting at 50%, but we get it at 1 octave higher. That's the only difference. It's square, then saw, and the same saw higher. That's it. Now, the cool thing is that, of course, with this control, you get some in-betweens. And that's, the cool thing about this. You're just not changing, the waveform directly to one thing to the other one. You just can get some nice blends. All right, so then you hit this control. Now, of course, this one is going to be the pulse width. If I do it on on a sawtooth, nothing is going to happen because, as you might not know, the only can do pulse modulation with square. Now, some synthesizers, they allow you to do it on different waveforms, but by convention, it's just on the, square waves. So that is, it goes thinner and super thin. And same thing is on the other way, but it goes more into the negative. It's make it wider, narrow and wider. Now the cool thing is that, of course, you can run some modulation right here. Okay, so then you get the sub control. Now, what is the sub? So some synthesizers, for example, like the Juno control, they give you a sub. So this one, what it is just a square, an octave down. That's it. So I'm getting this saw, and as soon as I introduce the sub, it's gonna change whatever we have right here to a square, an octave lower. That's everything that it does, okay? Notice right here, I'm gonna go to 8. Notice that it's a little bit different. It's just a square lower. Now again, just like the shape, the cool thing is that you can get a nice blend of whatever you have on the shape and whatever you're doing on the sub. So you start getting different sounds. And all of this is just to get a nice modulation if you want to modulate this one. But that's all that it does. It's just converts whatever you have right here to a sub. All right, so let's talk about the sync control. So with this one, you can create really cool sounds. So let's say I make a chord and I start moving this. And we get that sound. So if you have to explain this on lame terms, the sync, what it's going to do is going to modify the waveform. It's going to kind of fold it, and we are going up in let's say pitch. Let's say pitch. I'm just trying to explain this on lame terms. So as soon as we do sync, notice that the sound is going to start to change, and you know the waveform goes really crazy. Notice it's going crazy. It's going crazy, and at one point it's going to stabilize. Now, if I go 12 up, let me just, kind of put it on the 12 range right here. There you go. So notice that the sound is completely stable. So what is happening right here is that we are doing 1 octave higher of whatever we had from before. And actually I can actually prove this. I'm going to go and bring a button, right? Go and just bring a button. And I'm going to go and say that whenever we click it, we are going to be turning off the sync, or we turn it on, and remember we are at 12. So if I turn it off and, do something, I'm going to go maybe 1 higher to 4, we get that sound, right? So if I go and turn this on, of course, we're going to be higher in pitch, but if I go back to 8, it's the same sound. Notice it's the same. And it's because the sync will do that. It will fold it until we reach, 1 octave higher, and, and up and up and up. Now, the cool thing, of course, is that we don't use this just like this, because it makes no sense, right? If you want to go higher, just use the pitch, the range control or the pitch control, right? So the cool thing about this is that we get all the in-betweens. And if we put a modulator, just like maybe an LFO, it's just going to create really cool sounds, because you're just going to get, again, the in-betweens of that waveform, Right. Then you get the unison control. Now, of course, you can play, you get many voices with this. Is a polysynth. So what you could get right here at the bottom is how many unison voices you want to use. Right now, we are just using 1. So it sounds pretty lonely. But you can make it sound bigger if you go up in the amount of voices. Now, of course, if I do 5, everything is going to be a little bit loud. Notice this is louder. And notice that there's kind of a phasing going on. I'm gonna talk about this in a second. And it's because the 5 voices are just playing in the same spot, and there's a little bit of kind of a phasing, because the voices are a little bit different. So, and this one, it gives you the kind of the stereo imaging. And notice that the waveforms are just a little bit different from left and right. That's why you get a kind of a stereo spread. Now, the cool thing is that, of course, you can detune the unison voices and get a really just big sound. And at this point, this is... At this point, this is just a very standard feature on any synthesizer. You just get the unison voices and you can detune them. Now, the cool thing is that you can do it in both. You can go right here, get a square, get a saw, and then go grab 5 voices, maybe, I don't know, something like that, and then do the detuning right there at the bottom. And you get a really cool sound. So, like we discussed earlier, every time I just press a key, right? We are just getting different waveforms right here. And we hear that phasing going on. So right here, what it will do, it will just turn on the Retrigger. So now all voices are going to be aligned. They're kind of a perfect. That's why we don't get that phasing. It's because they're all aligned on the same spot. So we don't get that phasing, right? So sometimes this is very useful and depends on what you're doing right here and how many voices you're using. Maybe you want this kind of hard sync, or maybe you want to do the unison and you want them to make it a little bit more perfect. well, then you will use the Retrigger. And this will sync all the voices to start on the same spot at the same place. And then, of course, you get the width control, which is going to be make it mono, make it stereo, right? Mono, stereo. And then you have the panning controls all the way to the left and all the way to the right. So one cool thing that you can do this with the panning control, which is something that you don't get on most, most synthesizers, is that you can maybe pan this one to the left, you can pan this one to the right, and you can get just just different sounds. Right? So really cool. And we're just doing a little bit of unison, a little bit of panning with just a saw, and you're getting a good, amazing sound out of this. Okay, so let's talk about this. I'm pretty much set everything to default, and we're gonna talk about this. Now, this is a little bit confusing, and they're very simple to understand because what they do sometimes it's not gonna really change the sound unless you make some changes right here. So, of course, the mix control is just the mix control. You get 1, 2, or you get a linear blend of the 1 and the 2, right? Okay. So then you get the negative, the negative control. So the negative, what it does, it will invert the phase of the oscillator number 2. And actually, we can see this when it's the oscilloscope. If I go all the way to the number 2 and I do something, we get this square. Now, the square, the saw, right? So what happens if I want to invert the saw, right? I just want to flip it. So we can do this. If I go to negative, that is going to flip the phase of the number 2. So now we have, a different saw. All right. So of course, So of course, nothing is going to happen if we, start messing with the number 2 because it sounds pretty much the same, right? It's the same saw, just a different face. But as soon as I go and bring the first one, notice we start to get different sounds. Now, remember that we talked about the Retrigger control, that sometimes when we press keys, notice that every time is a little bit different. And it's because we are starting the waveform on different places every time we press a key. The Retrigger is going to sync and start all the waveforms at the same time on the same spot. So remember, the negative is inverting the phase of this saw. And right here at the top, we have the same saw, right? They are both the same. So if I do something, this one is inverted and the other one is the other way. But if I go 50% and I play something, we get complete silence. Because this one, since we are inverting the phase, we are getting a complete phase cancellation. Because remember, both are starting at the same time. Now, of course, this is not very useful. Now, it is useful when you start changing or offsetting the different waveforms. Maybe the second one is going to be a sub, and the first one I'm going to do a little bit of sync, and maybe something like that. I'm going to make it unison we just need to change the different waveforms just to get different sounds. And now you are going to get something different. You're not going to get that phase cancellation. Okay, so let's talk about the wipe control now. I'm going to go to the wipe and I'm going to, again, set everything back to default so we have something dumb, right? Same and same, right? So I'm going to go and bring the wipe. Now, the mix is the linear blend between the 1 and the 2. So I'm going to go and make it a sub, right? So we get the sub, and then we get a linear mix of, between the 1 and the 2. And that's what we get. Cool. So wipe, it's pretty much the same thing than the mix, but it does it on a different way. So if I go right here and I start blending it, notice that the change comes, we're starting to get more change when we are closer to 50% right here, to, the middle. Not so much when we start. If I do the mix, as soon as we, start moving, everything starts changing. But not with the wipe. We need to be closer. And of course, notice that the change is a little bit different. We get different waveforms. That's the whole point. Now, they do sound very similar. right? They do sound similar, but it's doing just a different way of doing the mix. That's all. That's what it means. Now, all of this controls what they, I assume, they gave us, is just to do modulations, because they assume that we want to do something like this, right? We want to modulate this control. So of course, whenever you are doing a blend, the sound is going to change when you modulate this. So different ways of switching from 1 and 5 and, doing phase cancellation with the negative are just going to create different sounds when we move the knob. So the wipe, again, is just the same as the mix, but it just does it on a different way. It's not linear. Now, of course, all of this that we are doing really matters, the sound really changes when we are just changing the controls, where we are using different waveforms. Right now, we do get a change right here, but if I pretty much go to the same thing, just nothing is gonna happen, right? So you need to offset them a little bit. Just do a little bit of offset, and you're gonna start getting some changing sound. Notice that the waveforms, they look very different. All right, so let's talk about the AM mode right here. So this one means amplitude modulation. So this, what it does, it means that it will use the oscillator number 2 to modulate the number 1 in amplitude. And the thing is that, of course, let me just go right here and do something like this. And if I play something, we're just listening to the number 2. I'm gonna go and just make it not so crazy. And notice that if I go to mix, we get the saw, but when I go to AM, we get a completely different sound. And it's because, again, this one is going to be used to modulate the number 1. We are kind of disabling the oscillator number 2. We just hear the number 1. If I go right here, notice that that's the sound we get, right? Now, of course, let me just go and do something like this. Just get them closer, right? Okay. Now, the thing is that the number 2 is going to be used to do an amplitude modulation to the number 1. But the thing is that this one is super fast. So we need to make it really slow just to hear that something is going on. Just to prove that it's doing an amplitude modulation. So I'm going to go and do it like this. And notice that we can actually hear it. And if I go down in pitch, we hear that amplitude modulation, we can hear it going up and down, up and down. And we can actually see it on this spectrum. It's going up and down, just like an LFO. Now the thing is that as I go to the number 1, we don't get it, because now we are listening to the other one, to this one, right? Now, of course, as soon as you start going towards the number 2, it means that now the number 2 is being used to modulate the number 1. That's why we hear the number 1 going up and down. We are just doing a little bit, kind of a tremolo. Now, of course, we are going super low, right? So as soon as you go to more kind of a normal, it's gonna go faster, and just faster and faster, until we get that, that kind of sound. Now, of course, remember, I've told you that as soon as you start separating both oscillators, you start getting different sounds. That is the difference. Get the number 1 and the amplitude modulation with the number 2. Really different, right? Now, of course, notice that these ones, the one at the top, the mix, the negative, and the wipe are very are just very similar, right? And it's because these ones are just a little bit, I wouldn't say wild. They're just very, very soft. Now, the ones at the bottom are just going to be a little bit more aggressive. And as soon as you separate the oscillators, they're going to get more aggressive. Now again, all of this is just so you can just modulate this control. Okay, so let's talk about the sine one. Now this one is a little bit weird to understand, but I'm gonna try to make it as easy as possible. So the sine, what it does is going to use the polarity of the oscillator number 1, and it's gonna be using it on the oscillator number 2 to kind of create a version of the number 2. Using the polarity of the number 1. Okay, so let me just show you. Once you see it right here, you're gonna say, oh, okay, I get it. So okay, I'm gonna go to the mix control for now, and everything is back to default. So I'm gonna go and just maybe gonna go lower. I'm gonna go right here. So when I talk polarity, it means that this is the polarity. We have the 0 line right here. This is positive, and this is negative. So it's positive, negative, positive, negative, positive. Right? That's the polarity. Now, if I go to, right now we are using pretty much the same thing. And notice I'm doing the retrigger. We are using the same waveforms. Everything is the same. So if I go to mix and I go to number 1, we get the same waveform. If I go to number 2, we get the same, right? If I go to sine and do the same thing, I go to 1, I get the same. I go to 2, I get the same. Yeah, so nothing is happening. Remember, it's going to use the polarity of the number 1 to create a version of the number 2. So if both oscillators are the same, just nothing is going to happen. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to go back to the mix, and I'm going to go maybe to, to the 2. So we are going to get something like that. Let me just find the node where it's going to kind of stabilize. I'm going to go maybe use the number 1. Let me go. I'm going to use 2. Why not? Okay. So now I'm going to go here, right? So we get, just higher in pitch and then lower in pitch with the oscillator number 1. Oscillator number 1 is this, and oscillator number 2 is this. Now, if I go to sine, we get that. We get something completely different because both are the same. Now, I'm going to go to the oscillator number 1, and we know that it's up, down, and up. That's the polarity. As soon as I go to the number 2, notice that we are kind of keeping that polarity. It's up, down, up. Same thing on this one, up, down, up. Remember, it's using the number 1 to create a version of the number 2, because the number 2 is going to be this. So now, of course, on the sine mode, we keep the polarity of the number 1, but it's using the number 2, the oscillator on the number 2, to create this shape. Now, of course, you can go in betweens, and we can actually see the change between the number 1 and the number 2. And of course, this creates different sounds. It's not this, right? So that's the sine. It's just a little bit weird to understand when you read the manual, and besides the manual of Bitwig with this synthesizer is just non-existent. So yeah, that's what we get. That's what the sine does. Okay, so let's talk about the last one, which is going to be the max. Now, to be honest, I have no idea how it works behind the scenes. I can see what it's doing on the spectrum, but I have no idea how it works. So let me just show you what it does. So right now, I'm going to go, maybe I'm going to close this one and bring this. If you click right here, it's going to show you the expanded version. You can see the filters, and you can even interact with the filters. You get a visual of the 1, the 2, of the mix of both, and then what comes out of the filter, right? So we're gonna use this. So okay, so right now I have on the oscillator number 1, I'm gonna go and just show you. I have a square, right? And if I go to the number 2, I have a saw, but notice it's really high in pitch, right? So of course, with the mix, which is what we know, we get 1, we get a blend, or we get the other one, right? Now the maxed it's a little bit weird. It's going to keep the oscillator number 1 waveform, and behind the scenes on the negative side is going to start introducing the oscillator number 2. And we can actually really see right here, this on the screen. So I'm going to go and play the 1, right? And notice this one is kind of a wave shape. It's just cut it. So I'm going to go and start bringing the oscillator number 2, and notice it starts to appear. And they start to appear right here at the top as well. And until you get, of course, kind of a full blend of the first one, because you're still keeping that square behavior, but you also get this saw right here at the bottom. Super weird. It's just super weird. But it's awesome, you know, you get a very weird just waveform. I've never seen kind of a waveform like this. And it's because this is not a standard synthesizer. They give you the classic kind of a waveforms, the classic ways of doing things with the synthesizer, but they give you some weird, you know, shaping tools. That's why, you know, this synth is just fantastic. So, of course, it's pretty boring. Now, when you start separating things, just like, you know, we spoke earlier, you're gonna start getting just weird stuff or just more interesting sounds and interesting waveforms. Right? Not so interesting, right? Much better. So right here we get a noise control. It's just a noise control. We just get noise. That's it. We just get noise. Then you get this control. So this one is going to be the filter oscillation. So right here, I'm going to go and do a little bit of cutting on the frequency. And notice that it goes darker, and it's because I'm cutting frequencies. We can see it right here. It's just a filter, right? I'm just doing a little bit of it, the cutting off. Now, this one, what it will do, it will use whatever sound that comes out of the blend of the oscillator mix, you know, from the 1 and the 2, and it's going to be used to modulate a little bit of the filter. Notice it starts to behave a little bit different. Now, since this waveform is very stable, we are not going to get a lot of change. But as soon as we start, you know, make this waveform move, it's going to start behaving on a different way. Notice it sounds very different. So this sound, this waveform we see right here is being used to modulate a little bit of the kind of frequency. So this, for example, let's see this waveform is up, down, up, down, up, down. So this one, it's doing something like this very quickly because it's using the audio rate of the, you know, of the kind of frequency. So that's all that it is. Okay, so I'm back to something very kind of a normal right here. So, okay, so we get the common saw. So what we get right here at the bottom, we get a filter. So we can do a high pass filter. So this means that if I go and, you know, press a key and we have low frequencies, on this one we can select 2-pole or high pole and we can cut the lows, right? And we can see it right here on the frequency spectrum that we are cutting a lot of lows. As, you know, on top of that, we can do a resonance, we can do a peak. So this is actually kind of cool when we do bass. So we can boost a little bit of that signal, that harmonic. On top of this, I'm going to go lower the volume. You can go and do a little bit of drive. And this section, the drive section, it's completely different from this one. We can just turn this off and we can still drive the filter. All right, so super cool. So then, of course, we get a pitch control. We can go down. We can go up, right? At this point, all of this is just standard controls on any synthesizer. Of course, you get the glide control, which is like the portamento, you know? So pretty simple. I feel like I don't need to explain it. Okay, so then you get the feedback control. So this one is a little bit weird. It's like a different stage of a drive. It's a clipping. It's doing a little bit of clipping. So if I do a saw waveform and I you know, do something and I start introducing feedback, notice it goes louder. And at one point, when it reaches the maximum point, it's going to clip. And notice this is doing it. Let me just lower the volume. It's doing it on the filter. It's what comes out of the filter. The oscillator mix stays the same, so we are not applying that to the oscillator mix. And if I do a little bit of drive, it's just gonna do a little bit more, and we are going to clip a lot. So think of the feedback control as a clipping kind of a thing. So a little bit of saturation, let's say. Now, of course, this is a little bit more obvious when you start separating the, the oscillators. Let's say I want to do something like that, do a sync on this one, maybe a little bit of sub. This is not that interesting, but if I do a little bit of feedback, it's giving us a little bit of that saturation, which is really nice. There is a difference. All right, so then you get the filter control, and you get a very standard filter controls. You can go and do, of course, right here, you can do a low pass. You can do a low pass with 4 poles. This one is 2. This one is 4. You can go and do a band pass, or you can do a more kind of a narrow band pass. And you can, really hear the difference right here. I'm not going to spend a lot of time, explaining this because it's pretty obvious. And then you can do the opposite, which is what we are kind of doing right here, but you can do it from here. You can do a high pass, which means that you're going to be cutting the lows, right? And you can really cut the lows. Now, this one is 2 pole. This one is 4 poles. Same thing we have right here at the top. And then you get a notch type of filter, which is gonna, pretty much make a notch at one point. Notice that we are doing that notch right here, right here. Cool. And then you get pretty much no filter. All right, so let's go to, the 2 pole. And of course, you get the filter control, the cutoff. I feel like I don't need to explain this. Then you get, of course, the, let me just do something lower. You get the resonance control. We can see the peak right here. Really nice filter, So then, and I'm gonna go again back to something a bit more normal. Maybe not that. Let me go there. There you go. Maybe I'm gonna go to 16. All right, so there you go. Okay, so right here you get, of course, the key tracking. Now, if you don't know what key tracking is on a synthesizer, it means that it will track your keys. That's why it's called key tracking. So if I go all the way down, it means the key tracking is off. So it means that within the filter, if I press the lower keys, it's gonna sound equally to when I play higher keys, right? Play low, play high, we get the same filter. But sometimes, whenever we play high keys, we want to get a little bit more of the highs. So this one will enable the key tracking. So if I play low keys, it sounds, the filter sounds a little bit different. But when I play high keys, the higher keys are just gonna be a little bit more bright. So that's what key tracking is. It's a very standard control. No key tracking. Notice that they sound different if I do that. The higher keys are just a bit more present and the lower keys are darker, right? So sometimes it's just, very useful, and sometimes you don't want to use it, and sometimes, you just want. It depends on what you're doing. Then you get the envelope generator, and this is, for example, if you play something, let me just go up in volume. You get the cutoff, right? So what you want to do is maybe every time you press a key, you want that behavior. So this one will, of course, decide the amount of how you want to move. And you can go in negatives or you can go in positives. So if you go to positive, it means that whatever instruction you have right here on the ADSR controls is going to go up, right? And if you go into negatives, it means that this instruction means that it's going to go down. That's pretty much what it means. The 50% is just, nothing. It's kind of off. It doesn't matter what we do on the ADSR controls. Nothing is going to happen. So if I don't go up and I go down right here on the filter, it's going to be very dark. And now we can control that movement with the ADSR controls. And again, I'm not gonna go and explain the ADS, how ADSR works, and I believe at this point you should know. Let me just make this sound a little bit more interesting, because it's just sounds very dull. Okay, it's just a little bit better. Now, of course, it's super dark, but what I want to do, of course, I want to do that. If I do nothing, it's going to be very dark. Now, this is something cool that you get with this synthesizer that you don't get with a lot of synthesizers, which is going to be the curve. So you can make it just, exponential or linear, or go the other way. Notice it reacts different to the envelope. So at the same time, this envelope generator can demodulate others of the stuff. That's why you get a filter envelope generator. So maybe I want to do a little bit of the resonance when I do this, right? So what I want to do is that. And now you can use this control to modulate other things. Maybe what you want to do, you want to go and modulate a little bit of the sync, or maybe even the unison. You can do that, and it's going to start getting a little bit crazy. Right, so you get really crazy sounds, and this is kind of the nature of this synthesizer. Get you some really nice sounds, or you can go crazy. All right, so then you get of course, the envelopes, the ADSR, and you can also do the same thing with the amp. Right, you can go right here and map it to, I don't know, the pitch. Okay, so let's talk about the last thing, because we already covered pretty much everything. So we need to talk about the wave shaping modes that we get right here. So I'm gonna go right now. Of course, it's off. So we get different modes, and there is no clear explanation. On the manual, there is no information at all. But some of them are just easy to predict, and then some other wave shaping modes are just a bit difficult to explain. But we can see them going right here. So I'm gonna go to soft. So the first one, the soft, and I'm using just a simple, saw. It's just a soft clipping, so nothing really too aggressive. But the other ones are really aggressive. They really change the sound. The soft is, again, the soft clipping. It's just gonna do a little bit of clipping. Notice that everything goes a little bit more silent. Now remember, as soon as you get more harmonics and you get more, more here on the oscillator, of course, this one is gonna just do a little bit more. Right now, it's just kind of a lowering the volume. Again, it's just a soft clipping. Okay, now the other ones are just gonna go and get crazy. So you get the sine wave shaping. Now I'm gonna go and do this. Maybe let me go to a little bit lower. And I'm gonna do the retrigger so we can always see the same waveform right here. So the sine wave shaping is gonna go, and notice as soon as we are over 30%, the saw starts to change, right? And this is not happening on the original waveform. It's happening on the filter. So as soon as we start going at it, right here from the crossing, the starting point of the peak of the saw, notice that a sine starts to appear. And you can see it there going. And as soon as you keep going up, you're gonna get more and more. And of course, you get this gnarly sound. But they start right here. So of course, if you're using a higher pitch, you go up in pitch, you're gonna get much more of this. But that's the idea, you know? It starts right here and starts giving you a sine. All right, so then you get the other mode, which is the second. It says emphasizes second harmonic. So this one behaves, it's pretty much the same idea to sine, but it just, you know, works in a different way. Right? The other ones are just, again, we can see them. Let me just go back to right here, 0. So, of course, you get the positive and the negative, and you have the 0 crossing point, right? On each, you know, waveforms. You get, again, positive and then negative right here at the bottom. So as soon as you go up on this one, notice that the 0 crossing, when this goes from negative to positive, is starting to do that. Notice that the shape gets a little bit more narrow, and we can hear it going narrow. Now, of course, I'm showing you all of this on basic waveforms, but this is gonna sound a little bit better when you start getting, you know, a bit more interesting sounds. Notice that we get some a little bit of movement, and this just, you know, is boosting that. So always remember that. Just you get a more interesting sound, and this is just gonna be a little bit better. Okay, so then you get the rect. So this is it says, let me just show you the it says blends a rectified version. So notice that as soon as I go, it's going it's kind of sending everything to the negative. So whenever you rectify something, just gonna give you a point of reference, it's gonna kind of chop whatever you have on the negative. So you only get whatever it's on the positive. That's happened when you rectify something. Or you can, of course, you get the negative and you get the positive. So in this case, it's kind of doing something like that. Notice that it's bringing everything back and it's getting a version into the negative side of things. And of course, this creates a different sound. Now, what would happen if we do a little bit of unison and then a little bit of sync? Alright, super crazy. Alright, so let's go back. Okay, and we can actually see this folding. Notice that it's this is the 0 crossing point and the 0 crossing point. And this is the peak, right? So as soon as we go up, notice that this starts to break on the 0 point. And then the peak takes the peak, and then we just go way down on the crossing. All right, so last but not least, we have the fold. Now, the fold, let me just go down in volume, doesn't do much if you're not doing something very specific. So notice that I gotta go to off, and we can see the whole, you know, the whole waveform. As soon as I go to off, to fold, we are chopping the upper peaks, right? We're just chopping this. So this means that this is very reactive to whatever volume or whatever incoming signal happens to the filter. So if I lower the volume, the fold is pretty much not doing anything, and it doesn't matter I go all the way up, it's just not doing anything. But the drive, since we are driving again the filter, the fold is gonna start reacting to the drive. So notice I'm gonna go all the way up, and if I drive the signal, it's gonna start doing that. It's gonna start folding on itself. And notice that now, since we are driving too much to the filter, we have a kind of a square because we are chopping all the upper parts. If I go back on the drive, we are back to the saw, and now we are to the square. And if we start folding, we get that. So all of these tools, again, the blend controls and the wave shaping are just extra tools. If you don't want to use them, you just, you can dismiss them. You just cannot use it and use the oscillators and the filters, and you're just gonna get really great sounds. Everything else is just for experimentation. It's just for experimentation. Now, of course, it's a little bit hard, to create sounds because maybe sometimes you just don't know what they do. Well, now you do. Now you have an idea of what they do, and you can do a little bit of experimentation. I'm gonna be releasing some other videos, maybe this week or next week, and we're gonna create patches. We're gonna create sounds with this using different different modes, different wave shapings. But we're gonna add some other things at the end, and we're just gonna learn how to use this synthesizer by creating sounds. We're gonna create basses, pads, leads, arpeggios, and things like that. Right? So this video maybe was too long, but if you wanted to learn how to use this one, now you know what everything does. On the next one, we're going to start practicing. So hopefully you liked the video. Remember to like and subscribe, and remember to check Patreon, and see you on the next one.